Mm-hmm.
Sometimes that abuses people to try and control their thinking. They get frustrated with that.
Mm-hmm.
I think there's been enough early evidence in the past that talks about appropriate rather than
Well, appropriate. Let's put the parameters on it. When I say too much thinking, I'm talking about too much deep analyzing specifically. I'm talking about analyzing where does this come from, why do I feel this way, and pursuing it, and pursuing it, and pursuing it, and chasing your own tail. That's what I mean by thinking too much. I don't mean thinking in a broad sense. I mean being in that loop of why do I feel this way, why do I feel this way. That's what I'm referring to. Yes, ma'am. What about the label of depression? How important is it to know the label? Appreciate that the label is a clinical shorthand. In the real world, there is no such thing as depression. Clinicians decide that when somebody has this cluster of symptoms, then they have this particular label. Personally, I'm not interested in the label at all. I'm not interested in saying to somebody, you have this particular form of depression. What I'm real interested in is how can I help this person change their experience? So I'm not particularly interested in the label. Yes, ma'am. Yeah, she's asking about what happens when somebody goes to the doctor, gets the label, gets the prescription, and then 40 years later they're still on the drugs. That's really what I've been talking about, is how that's really not a very good thing to do. And you know, again, physicians think that they're doing a favor to their patient to do that, and physicians are reading the same journals, and the problem has been, as I alluded to this past year, when the journals have really been catastrophically broadsided by the insight that the data have been manipulated, that the value of the drugs has been greatly overstated, and thinking that these are neutral places of valid information, and then to find out that they're not. The premier medical journal in the United States, probably the world, is called the Journal of the American Medical Association. The editor of the journal wrote a blistering editorial about the drug companies' deceptions. She used the word, quote, disgusting, to describe how rampant the abuse by the drug companies has been in the way they've manipulated the data published in the journals, and how the journals have been complicit with that. So it's not blaming the doctors necessarily. They're using what they thought was a reasonable perspective. But now, all these years later, we have enough evidence to show that just prescribing medications isn't doing the patient a favor. Okay, yes, ma'am.
We know exercise is, you know, an integral part of trying to get over depression, like say.
Exercise is valuable, sure.
Is it still true that exercise first thing in the morning is better for somebody who's depressed than, say, doing it in the middle of the day or the afternoon?
What the exercise research has shown, in fact, a huge, what's called a meta-analysis was just published. A meta-analysis is an analysis of a bunch of different studies. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter whether it's aerobic exercise, anaerobic exercise. It doesn't matter whether it's morning or afternoon. What matters is that the person gets moving, that it's consistent. Okay, back there. Well, so now think about the language that you're using, because here's what I refer to as the global cognitive style. Nothing matters. Everything's lousy. Could it be any bigger than that? Literally life and death. I want to bring it back down to, so what are you going to do today that's going to make you feel better? I don't want to deal with the big existential issues of the whole meaning of your life. I want to know what you're going to do this morning. And so, the focus has to be immediate enough. When you're dealing with younger people, yeah, you can talk about longer term plans and what you can build over the next 2 years or the next 5 years. When you're talking to somebody who's 91, whose health is really poor and all those things, you can't really talk to them about what's going to happen 5 years from now. But you can talk to them about what's going to happen this afternoon. So again, you just don't want to go so global with it. Back there? Speak up, please. About treating depression in someone with dementia. Depends on the nature of the dementia, depends on the degree of the dementia. What happens for most people who suffer dementia is, initially at least, they have great long-term memory. They can tell you things that happened 25 years ago in great detail. They just can't tell you what was going on 15 minutes ago. Now think about that in terms of learning. How can I teach you a skill when an hour from now you're going to forget that we had the conversation? Skill building means a progression. So that becomes one of the conditions where skill building becomes less significant, and now comes medical management. Okay? Yes, sir?
Other end of the spectrum, I guess I'm really interested in what we can do for our 4 and 5 and 6-year-old children to reduce the risk of depression in the future, particularly kids who maybe are facing other
Right.
challenges like disability or...
Right. To me, there's no more important question than that one. What can we do about kids? And when I talked about the potential for prevention, the prevention programs have been primarily aimed at children. What is the single most important skill that you can teach a child? The answer is how to think critically. Getting people to emote is easy. Getting people to think is not so easy. And when I talked about foresight, and I just showed you this cartoon of the mother visiting the son in prison, literally from the time this child can speak and grasp concepts, you start teaching cause and effect thinking. And you start teaching linear sequencing. So to say to a 2-year-old, why do you suppose we put your socks on before we put your shoes on? Why do you think we put the toothpaste on the toothbrush before you put the toothbrush in your mouth? To start training this child to think in terms of first this, then this, then this. That's how you start to learn to think predictively. When we've taken kids who are 8, 9, 10 years old, and we have used a variety of techniques, role-playing strategies, videos, games, where we teach them to problem solve, where we teach them social skills, and we track these kids. Now, the one program I'm thinking of as I described this was a 6-month program. Kids were seen every other week for 2 hours, all right? 4 hours a month for 6 months. 24 hours total training in how to think, how to problem solve. Tracking these kids for the next 5 to 7 years, their rate of depression was less than half. The rate of teenage pregnancy was less than half. The rate of drug abuse was less than half the kids who didn't go through the program. Learning to think ahead, learning to problem solve is one of the most valuable skills that you can give your kids. But that requires time. It requires involvement. And when you have parents who are too busy for their kids, they'd much rather give their kid a new Game Boy or a new Wii or a new Nintendo or whatever it is so the kid will just keep quiet and go play somewhere. It's really unfortunate how, and the way that it translates was something I mentioned earlier. The largest group of depression sufferers are in the 25 to 44-year-old age bracket. The fastest growing group of depression sufferers is their kids. You can't teach a kid what you don't know. But teaching kids how to think, how to reason, how to recognize and manage their feelings, what's called emotional self-regulation, is how we deal with kids. And they can learn these skills at home, they can learn these skills at schools. We've been training teachers, we've been training parents. A lot of schools